Where's my clicker?
I'll just stay here and pop on.
OK, cool. Hey, guys. My name's Sebastian. I work as a technical evangelist for Telerik. And over there is Hristo Deshev, who's the guy that actually built the thing. So I'll talk about it. He will show you. And I think that should work quite fine. And as you probably noticed, I am dressed as Angular Connect. So that should go well. All right, let's get going. So for the past 6 months, Angular team and NativeScript team were working together to bring Angular 2 and NativeScript together so that you could create something really, really cool. And the whole idea was to kind of enable Angular 2 developers to not only be able to build web apps, but as well native mobile applications. So since May, every Tuesday, the lead developer from the Angular team was meeting with the lead developer from the NativeScript team, and they were planning something amazing. They were planning mobile app world domination. And from the very first meeting, the idea was to take advantage of Angular's architecture, which is completely platform agnostic, and build something really cool. So you probably already learned how Angular 2 works internally, but the whole idea is that you write your code starting with the markup, and in NativeScript we decided to use HTML, and then you have a DOM adapter that basically takes it and parses it into a node tree, and we're using parse5. So then that node tree then gets compiled into a set of proto-views, which basically you can think of them as a bunch of templates. And until now, all of this is completely platform agnostic, which means that the next thing after that might be a website, might be a native mobile application, it could be a Hoover, could be anything. So obviously the big task for us was to implement the NativeScript renderer, which basically takes the proto-views and then translates them into native visual tree elements. So these are completely native iOS or Android elements. As well, the NativeScript renderer is responsible for sending any events or property changes between the proto-views into NativeScript visual tree or back into proto-views. So you kind of have the both-way communication. And this means that you can actually go and start building Angular 2 components for NativeScript, which basically are made of the component part where you define what sort of input, what sort of output you can have, what should go on the page, and as well you have the code behind, which is the class of the actual component. So what's NativeScript? So NativeScript is basically a way for you to use JavaScript to build mobile applications with native UI. Is it PhoneGap? Well, it is not PhoneGap, it is not Ionic, because there is no DOM, there is no browser. The UI components that you will see in there, they're 100% native. If you see a button there on Android device, that's an Android button, not an HTML element that looks like it. The next comparison is to Xamarin. Well, it's not Xamarin because we don't do cross-compilation. So the JavaScript that you'll be writing executes at runtime on the device itself, so it always stays as JavaScript. And then finally, if we look at React Native and Accelerator, then the whole idea is that we get access directly to the native APIs. So the whole thing is that you don't have to write any native wrappers in order to access a specific feature. It's all exposed to you directly. And why would you use NativeScript? A, skill reuse. If you know JavaScript or Angular 2, then you're ready to go. Next thing is code reuse. So you could reuse some of the NPM modules, or you could use third-party native libraries, be the UI or just with the business logic. Like I mentioned before, you can very easily get access to the native APIs without any specific wrappers. And obviously, the whole framework is open source. So there's not much to sell. You should basically think of NativeScript as the bridge between your JavaScript to NativeScript into the native platforms. So as a very simple example, we have Android text.format.time. This is basically a namespace and is a function that we're calling that exists directly on the native platform on Android. But we are able to actually call it from within the code from JavaScript. Or similarly, if we look at a code for iOS, if you want to create a native UI alert view, then basically you just call new URL alert view, set some properties, you call it, and we're ready to go. And if you're kind of thinking like, well, okay, so how do I know how to call it? Well, just go to Apple's documentation, and all of the properties and functions that are defined in there. We don't write any wrappers for those. Everything is kind of sorted out already, and I'll explain how in a sec. So how does it work? The whole thing runs on a JavaScript virtual machine. And the idea is that all your code runs on JavaScript virtual machine, and any code that is specifically meant to go into native API then basically goes through a few steps, what we call the bridge. So if you're trying to instantiate a file object on Android API level, then what you can do is just call a new Java.io file. Then we have this thing called type conversion service, which will take JavaScript types, and then it will translate them into a native string objects or whatever native representative it is. Then we have metadata, which will basically make a lookup and try to connect the function we're trying to call to the function that exists on the native platform. And then finally, we have a call dispatcher that takes the previous two and makes the actual call on the native platform. And we kind of get like a dual result. So on the Android side, we get a native file object, while on the JavaScript side, we get a custom proxy object, which basically is connected to the native one. So that every time you make a call on the custom proxy object, that gets delegated to the native one. If there's an event that's raised on the native object, it moves back up to our custom proxy object. Obviously, you don't want to be writing iOS or Android-specific code because that would be just pointless, right? And that's why we have this thing called NativeScript Modules. And the thing is really cool because you just call require any module you want to use. You do it from your JavaScript code. Then the modules are like, the one thing for all. And then basically translate it into either Android code or iOS code, or in 2016, Windows Phone as well. And so coming back to our file example, this will probably explain it the best. If you want to use a file object, it basically just requires file system. And then if you run it on Android, you get this bit of code. And if you run it on iOS, you get this verbose representation of the same thing. But you don't have to know it. The module takes care of it for you. Another really cool module that we have is HTTP module. So you're writing your JavaScript code and you're thinking, okay, how do I call a web service? You make an AJAX call. Well, no, because you're on Android or you're on iOS, you should use the native components that actually do that. So we already wrapped it up in an HTTP module, so you can call it just like this, and then basically this will result in the directly native calls, which will be much faster than just an AJAX call. And this brings us to a slightly bigger picture, where basically you can use those modules at a higher level of abstraction, and then whether you run it on iOS or Android, you kind of translate to the code you want, and then you run on the specific apps. But the even bigger picture is if we add Angular to the whole thing, we could have a module on top of it, so that if you're building an application for mobile, we go the left route, but if we're building the same application for a web app, then basically we go in for an Angular XML HTTP request component, which will result in AJAX call as you would want, that will run on your web application. And this is the thing. We're looking at ability to have single code for both mobile applications and websites. And I mean native mobile applications, not just a web view. So what you really can expect is like, okay, we have Angular. So you can use pretty much attribute bindings, event bindings, everything that Angular kind of brings to you. But the thing is that you have to always remember the web UI and the mobile UI, they're not the same thing. Not only because there's no divs on the mobile devices, but as well because the UX is completely different. So you kind of have to, when you build your application with the single code approach, you probably have to think how should it look on the mobile, how should it look on the web. And so for example, like I mentioned before, there are no divs on mobile devices, but there are different layouts, like absolute layout or grid layout or wrap layout. Cool? I'll show you a bit of code so that you can know how to code with it. I have to move this here. Let's see. So what I'm going to do is I'll be using Sublime Text for my code, and as well a command line, which is connected to Genymotion. And basically, we have this feature called Live Sync. So every time I make changes to my files, it will automatically refresh on the right-hand side. There's one caveat, though. I'll be writing in TypeScript. So if I save TypeScript, it will refresh once. And then if I compile, refresh twice. So just bear with me. So in order to create just a very basic hello world, what you have to do is you create yourself a component. And the template basically will be have a stack layout there, add a label with a text hello world, and you're ready to go. The other thing that we need is when you start the page, we have to get our component and then run it through NativeScript Bootstrap. So that's the same function as when you call Bootstrap, but we call NativeScript Bootstrap so that when you want to Google for it, it's actually easier to find, and you find the one we created. So coming back to our example, so some other things that you could possibly do is say, OK, I don't want to hard code my message. I might want to, for example, have it as an attribute. So I could say, hello from Angular 2, because that's what it is. And then in order to bind it, I just add some square brackets. Whoa. Wrong move. And then I say, I want to bind it to message. If I save it, call grant, you refresh once for the TypeScript update, and wait for it. Now you should refresh it with our new message that we bound to. So now you see hello from Angular 2. Well, the guys in the back of the room might not see it, so the next thing we could possibly do, basically we have this thing called CSS in NativeScript. So I already have a class that makes it a little bit bigger. So let me just say, so class equals big, save it, grant. And in a moment, you should actually be able to see the message a bit bigger. Cool. There's another thing that you can have is you can have conditional styling. So I could, for example, have a Boolean say, there's a warning set to true. And I can basically say, I want to bind to one of the styles. So we have a warning label style. So I want to set my label to that style when warning is true. So if I save this again, call grant, I kind of expect the warning to have an orange color. So that should come up in a second. And it isn't.
Your closing brace on your label.
Oh, yes, I know what I. Thank you. This is live coding. You see, it's not cheating. This is a real thing. I always have to do something. Second refresh should do it. And there you go. Our label is now orange. So to do the next thing, like how would you, let's say, add a button with some function? So let's say we have a button that says, tap me. And there will be a function. So let's say we're binding to a tap event. So we could do on tap me. Let's close it. And now we can, inside our class, create an event. So say on tap me. And what I can do is basically say, I want to change this warning to switch to the opposite value whenever somebody taps it. Let's grant that. We need a second refresh to update. And basically, we'll have a button that we should be able to switch styles every time we tap. So there you go. So the whole connection works out. Some other things that we can do from Angular, For example, we could use ngIf. So we could have a label that we want to display when, for example, the warning is displayed as well. So let's say if I say ngIf equals warning. So when there's a warning, I want to have a text saying, panic, run. Okay, breathe, however you spell it. And then let's close that, save it. We need a second refresh. I was like, what? Why is it not there? And now, as we tap in and out, the label comes in and goes out. And that's kind of the ideas. These are the basics. So all of this that I'm writing here is just pure JavaScript with Angular 2. But the actual components there, they're native Android components. So that's pretty cool. So you didn't really have to think too much. All of this is HTML. However, we're using our own components. So there's no divs. So like I was saying, you have to use stack layout. You have to use labels. There's an input text if you want to catch a bit of input. So let me show you another example that's a bit more fun. So I have this. Let me just show it first, and I'll explain you a bit of code behind it. So where are we? Authentication Module and page. So I wrote a small module that basically deals with authentication, where we have stuff like username, password, whether we logged in or not. We have a message. But then as well, we have a few functions like login, logout, and register. This is all mocked, so everything happens in kind of memory, but kind of gives you the idea. So what I can do from within my page is I can start with basically requiring the authentication module. So I'm bringing it into my project. And then in my code behind of my application, for my class, I have authentication page class. I'm basically saying in the constructor, go and instantiate the authentication module. And then later on, if somebody presses the login button, I want to do something, or register, I want to do something else. Additionally, when I define my UI, so I have, let's say, starting with a label that basically binds to authentication message. So whatever is the current status, we're going to display that on the screen. Then we have a couple of text fields. So we have one text field to capture username, and it's bound to authentication username. And then as well, we have another text field that is bound to password. And to make it secure, I set it to true so that if I type, let's say, the password disappears, right? But it's still there. And then we have the few buttons. So you see we have definition for 3 different buttons, but you only see 2 because I'm using ngIf. So if we're not logged in, then I want to show the login I want to show the login and the register button. But when we're logged in, I want to show the logout button. That's the whole idea. And then another thing is that I can pretty much show you. So on login tab, we call in our authentication login, which returns a result, which is basically a Boolean. And if that is false, I want to do something else, and I want to run an animation that kind of shakes the screen. So I'll come back to that in a second, but just don't be surprised if I press login. This is not Genymotion going crazy. This is wrong password, type it correctly. So I could actually come back, say, type in, go login, and now we move into a different screen. So come back to the quick animation. What I'm doing is I'm passing in the form object into this animate function. And then inside there, that's something that is built directly within NativeScript, where you can actually take any UI component or a whole collection or a whole page and then perform an animation on top of it. So in order to do the shake, all I had to do is say, move it 10 pixels to the right 5 times really fast. And then that's pretty much what it does. You can do some other animations. You could spin things around. You can make things fade in, fade out, or go bigger or smaller. Or you can move the components around and make them fly all around. But just to shake, you just make it called translate, 10 to the right 5 times, and then it goes shaky. Obviously, Christo is next to me, so I should probably create an account for him. So difficult password, press register. Well, actually, his account already exists, so again, we get an error. And that's kind of like the things like you could create some sort of forms and bind them using Angular, and you can do really cool stuff. You can also make games with Angular and NativeScript. So this is the game. I'm going to make a lot of money because a lot of people are seeing it now. It's going to be very expensive because I need to make money for all the effort I made. This is really serious. The idea of the game is, when it comes, just wait for it. The idea of the game is basically we have numbers from 1 to 10. We put them in random order. And when you start the game, you kind of have to guess whether the next number is lower or higher. Well, this is obvious. It's going to be higher, lower. And then you kind of get points as you get it right or wrong. So I'm on fire. God, I should stop playing. I'm addicted. Come on. No, I got it wrong. 29, still a good score. So how does this work? The idea is that this is how it works. Very briefly, we have up-down model. And here's the thing. We have all the attributes. So we have like what's the current card, what's the score, how many cards are left. But we have as well start new game, go higher, go lower, and a lot of other functions that you actually have to implement to make it all happen. So on my page itself, I just go, get the model for my game. I instantiate it in my class. And then all I have to do is in my, like for example, to start a new game, I just bind the tab event to game engine start new game, or to go lower or go higher. You can kind of bind the buttons and all the attributes and etc. And you have a game that you can make money from. Well, I still have to work on it. So I'm going to bring Christo, who's going to show you some cooler stuff. So Christo, over to you. You good?
All right. Hi, everyone. So the first thing, when evaluating a UI framework, what is like the minimal application that you would expect to build with it or play with the framework, and how do you put it against the other frameworks out there? So here's what we did. We just thought if you can build a to-do MVC clone, you can build just about anything with our framework. And if you can't, well, too bad. You need to do something else and maybe stop receiving those emails about making your frameworks better. Anyway, so let me get rid of this one.
Yep.
All right, I'll just get it out. Let's first start with. So here's how this thing looks right now. Come on. It's a simple screen with a bunch of checkbox and adding new items, editing them, showing the different UI, and that's about all we got here. We can even. So let's go to the code. Here it is. As you can see, it's nope. Okay, it's mostly implemented in the visual template. The code behind it is really thin, just binding properties and delegating to a backend data service. The data service is supposed to contact some remote endpoint via HTTP. It really doesn't matter at the moment. So here is what really complex UI we can do just with Angular templates and doing simple things like ng4 to iterate a bunch of to-do items and display them in different components. So what this thing really does is just get the data, instantiate them using visual components that come mostly from the NativeScript UI framework. Well, you can display everything in the visual tree the way you want it, but here we have a problem. Not all mobile frameworks have, for example, a checkbox component. You could use something else, but it would look ugly. Android has it, but iOS doesn't. So what do? We'll just simulate it with an Angular component. The checkbox thing here is just that. Here is how it looks like. You just create a component, you add a template. The template is really simple. You just have an image and change the source to a different representation, so that when you click it, you just change the image at the back. The component has like the minimal thing you would expect from a component. You would have a public property that you can set from a binding from its master. And then you have an event that you would fire and notify someone that, hey, we have something changed here. And okay, let me get back to the main page. Here is how it works. We bind the check property here, and we handle the event. So maybe I should stop, get out of the world of ugly programmer created UI, and show you something that has had some attention from a designer. I mean a real designer. Let's start this one. We built this demo for the keynote, and we actually wanted to try and instantiate a real native visual control. This one here. This list view that supports different swiping and all sorts of actions is an actual native Android control built in Java. So you can just we picked an absolutely random third-party control, no strings attached, and you can just the point here is that you can take a native control and add it to your application. Our command line tool will even generate the TypeScript type definition so that you get IntelliSense when you code against it, and then you would just be able to instantiate it in the NativeScript module framework. And of course, you can drive all that from an Angular component view. So let me get back to the code. So this one here is governed by a component that hosts three other components. The one on the top, we call it the mode selector. The actual list view is wrapped in an Angular component that I call the post list. And then at the bottom, we have a details view that we show and hide whenever we select an item. So here it is, and then we get back from it. Well, as usual, this is just Angular, and where was it? Here is another simple component. This is so boring that at some point it gets second nature. There's no surprises, just your components. And then let me show you the last thing. Here is the list view component that I display here, and the most interesting part here is that binding to these properties, we're just passing data to the native Java code. And of course, we're handling events coming from it. And that's about all I got. And let's...
Cool. So basically, McFly went to the future. He's seen flying cars, hoverboards, and he completely missed Angular 2 with NativeScript. What a loser. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.